Ed is founder and CEO of the London Interdisciplinary School. And yeah, he joined us at the summit. And this is about a deep dive into the work of the London Interdisciplinary School. So Ed is the founder and CEO of the school, is also an institution designed specifically to support undergraduates, graduates, and professionals to tackle complex problems, which we know is a thing that we have in the cultural sector, definitely. Previously, Ed co-founded a 14 to 18 school in Stratford in London called School 21 and the UK's leading oracy education charity, Voice 21. So he's going to talk a little bit more about his work and background. So I'm not going to trump that because there's some exciting things in there that Ed has done. So I'm just going to hand over to you, Ed, and look forward to our session. It's great to have you here. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you, Erica. Yeah, very happy to be here. Everyone see my screen now? Cool. Great. Well, yeah, I'm going to talk for 25 minutes, 30 minutes or so, and then give you a chance to ask questions. If you want to interrupt me as we go, that's great. I'm very happy for that to happen too. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about two projects. It's the school project, School 21, which is a 4 to 18 school, and also the university project, because they're sort of part of a journey that one wouldn't have happened without the other. And the thread, of course, is that I'm trying to change the education system in some way or another. It irritates me. Lots of things irritate me about the education system as we have it today. The thing that we're trying to crack really with the university is to rip up this notion that we should organize education like we organize libraries. We used to have to organize knowledge into physical kind of spaces, like libraries, and also into brains. Those were the only places that knowledge was stored, was in books and bodies. And you had to kind of have a taxonomy, a way of organizing them. And we had the Dewey Decimal System, which is very helpful. And you'd have social sciences in one corridor, and you'd have engineering in another corridor of the library. And for some reason, we organized our education system the same way, but that was sort of caught on globally. And now knowledge is no longer stored in libraries or in brains. It's stored in those two places, but also everywhere else. It's networked, it's interlinked, it's not obeying any kind of taxonomy or disciplinary boundaries anymore, and nor does the world, nor do the problems we face. But our education system is still stuck in this Dewey Decimal System. So the education system still teaches in narrow disciplines. I have less of a problem with that in the school sector, but I do have a problem with that in the university sector where people go and study one discipline. And that is what we are tackling head on at LIS. In 2 years, we'll get a full university title, so we'll become LIU. So I don't need to get confused. LIS is a university, not a school. Right, let's start with my schooling education. Part of what motivated me to be here, that's me at the back. This is 1982. I'm 4 years old. And actually, it was a new school. It was a school that was founded by some retired teachers. It's a little independent school in the East Midlands in a village called Twycross, where there's also a semi-famous zoo. I saw someone's from Coventry, you might have been. That sort of set in my brain that you can do new things in education. It was a lovely school. I was there for 14 years, and I was kind of given a very good, pretty formal, boring education. Did quite well at exams. Had 30 people in my year group for 14 years. Went slightly mad because of that, but it was fine. The teachers were all sort of had a lovely set of values and cared very much about the students. I had this other experience alongside it, though, which was this. And those of you, my theory is that if you're born between 1977 and 1979, you might remember this. It's about a boy who turned into a dog. It's a TV show, and it ran for 5 or 6 years with me in it for 5 or 6 years on ITV. And that's me in the background. I turned into that dog, and we had similar sized parts in my view, but for some reason, there's a much bigger picture of the dog than me on the. I'll get over it one day. But this being in a TV show, I think helped me understand the notion that that sort of nothing is off limits to some extent, or rather, it demystified something that seems extraordinary, like making a television show or sitting in your room at home and watching something on television. It seems like magic. Actually, I realized this was just a team of people with some equipment, none of which was that mystical. And they worked very hard and in a very organized way and in a very collegiate way to get something done and get something made. And I even spent time sometimes in the edit suite, which was back then scissors and bits of film. And you go, okay, wow, they're sort of sellotaping this stuff together, and then then they should play it. And I think this was an important part of my education in terms of saying, not anything is possible, but there's a lot of things that you think are impossible and not for you that actually potentially are. And I think that sowed a seed in me that our education system could include that for other people. Like I'd go back to my school and my friends, I noticed the difference between my friends having had that experience or not having had that experience. And so this man helped me do something about it. In I wanted to start a school throughout my 20s, and I sort of thought I might do it in my 50s when I'd made loads of money. And then this guy started talking about, when he was in opposition still, the idea of free schools. And in 2010, Michael Gove brought in the free school policy with the coalition government, which meant that you could open a state school that was funded by the state where you had control over the curriculum. And so I quit my job in the city at the time, which I'd been doing for 4 years, to immediately start a school. And this was about 20 years ahead of schedule. I was, how old was I? 30, 32, something like that when I quit my job. Um, and I had this list of what things I had to do to try and start a school. You got to find a building, got to find a head teacher. Those two were the things I was most worried about. Government approval, I was less worried about because it was quite clear that the government really wanted this to happen. And in 2010, 2011, 2012, that was definitely true. The context has changed now. I think it's much harder to start a free school. And by the way, this is a trend that you will recognize. If you want to make use of a government policy, whether or not you like the government, and I hadn't voted for this guy, even though I sort of semi wanted him to get in to bring in this policy. Um, you've got to move early because there's a lot of energy behind it then, and that was the case with the new school. We had to raise some money, although not a lot. That mostly came from the government, and we had to convince parents and students and teachers to come and join us, and we had to design a curriculum. So it was a long list of things. Um, and I'll fast forward through all of that because in 2012 we opened School 21. So about 2 years later, I did it with a guy called Peter Hyman who'd worked in politics and then he'd been a teacher out in West London in a state school. And he also had a kind of very expansive view of what education should be. And we opened School 21 in Stratford. It was 4 to 18. We started with just 4-year-olds and just 11-year-olds. And we wanted to do things very, very differently. Um, Here's an example of a project. So project-based learning was one big part of it that I'm going to talk about. And the other big part of it I'm going to talk about is oracy. And there's lots of other things, but I'll just highlight those today. So this was a project we did at School 21 for 12-year-olds. And it was about using artistic skills, sort of sculpture skills, to represent a scientific experiment. And the reason I'm talking about this is we did this a couple of times, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. So one thing we noticed was that if the students decided to represent a chemical reaction by what they saw, i.e. the flames, they would create sometimes beautiful sculptures of kind of different colored flames, different bits of sort of shrapnel or whatever. But if you asked them what had happened on a molecular level, they either couldn't remember or they remembered for a bit and then a month or two later they'd forgotten. The students that had looked at it from a molecular level and then done a sculpture of what was happening there. So here I think the copper has been displaced by the more reactive magnesium. There's some kind of, something to represent that reaction. They basically remember it. I would be surprised if they don't still remember it now, 10, 15 years later. Because I still remember it, having spoken to them about it. So that was really interesting. So then we said, right, every time we do this project now, we need to be representing this at molecular level. And this is the thing with projects. They get a lot of criticism. They're hard to do well. But if they're done well, they can really unlock learning. Here's another one that we got slightly wrong, which was a sort of we asked the students to create dystopian comics about the Second World War. And the problem with that was 6 months later, they were a bit confused about whether Japan had actually won or lost the Second World War. So you've got to be a bit careful with younger students on dystopian work. This was a piece of work we did, which was brilliant. And I'm sharing a couple of extra ones because of this audience, where if you've come across Punch Drunk Theatre, who are an immersive theatre company, where the audience come into a building where these white kind of slightly masqueradey masks and they move through the building and experience the performance. The characters are just sort of existing and living and moving through the building. That's Punch Drunk Theatre. Our students did a production of that, which combined with learning about the Russian Revolution. So they were characters in the Russian Revolution, and they were moving through the school and the audience. I don't know if you can see there, they were wearing masks, which was sort of the parents and the community. And I found this very moving and important. And the other thing to remember is This is important because the students have to learn about both immersive theatre and they do have to actually learn about the Russian Revolution because when the audience interact with them, they need to be able to answer questions, they need to be able to interact with each other, and they're designing this experience. So we were doing lots of this stuff, which was pretty extraordinary. This is an example of oracy. And why didn't I start by saying what I mean by oracy? Oracy is speaking. And back in 2012, when Peter and I were talking about this, Peter came to me and said, there's this word from the 80s called oracy that hasn't been used for sort of 20, 30 years, which I think we should dust off because it essentially means for speaking what literacy means for writing and what numeracy means for maths. And it should be more important in schools. And we'd seen this absolutely appalling stat that in disadvantaged areas, students they only say 4 words in a 1 hour lesson in a city school on average, 4 words in a lesson, which we figured out was about 2 hours of speaking throughout your entire time at secondary school. So if you go in with not enough quality of speech, not enough words, literally, with English not being spoken as a first language at home, you're only going to be speaking in a formal setting in class for about 2 hours over the course of 5 years. So we needed to raise the status of speaking to the same level as reading and writing. That was our objective. And this is when we set up a charity called Voice 21, had big arguments about whether we were going to use the word oracy because it's hard to say and no one can spell it. But we did. And so back in 2012, 2013, School 21 became the first oracy school. And we started doing stuff like this. Now, one of the insights we had was that part of the problem with students' ability to speak is that they're always in school, always in the same context. With writing, you can create new contexts. With maths, you can create new contexts. With speaking, if you're always in school, you're in an audience of your peers and one teacher. Very rarely changes. Sometimes you're public speaking to all of those people. Sometimes you're just speaking in the classroom. Sometimes you're speaking to just your partner. But in life, as soon as they leave the school, they will not be in that context, and we're asking them to speak. And we started to see this was really bewildering for students. So what we wanted to do is create a situation where they're in a new context, but we're there to coach them, and they've got a purpose to their talk. And so they designed these campaigns. They wanted to campaign against mango because they'd found out that a factory had collapsed in Bangladesh in the supply chain for mango clothing, and they created this protest outside of Mango on Oxford Street. This is one of their flagship stores, and none of the staff knew what the hell to do about this. I don't think it's in your training, how you move on some kids who've joined from Stratford in East London. And they had a purpose to this protest. Unlike lots of protests we've seen in the last 10 years, this was timely. It was asking for something specific. It was saying sign our petition. There was an argument behind it. And they experienced an amazing thing of talking to people. Some people didn't want to talk to them. That was fine. Some people engaged with them, asked them difficult, challenging questions. So, after all of this, so after all these projects and after all this focus on oracy, we were a little bit worried that our students wouldn't get very good grades. But they came in the top 5% of attainment for GCSEs in the country. And they're in certainly the poorest 10%, I think, of the country in terms of household income. The average household income in Stratford, East London, is £16,000 when I was there, and we came in the top 5% for exam results. So this was very, very gratifying and actually a massive relief. But I would say the thing that has gone on beyond our school was not the projects. And I think that might be because the projects are a little bit too hard to do to a very high quality. What's gone on is oracy. So there was an oracy commission in 2024, and now there is an oracy leader and an oracy strategy in a quarter of schools in the country. So that's something like 6 or 7,000 schools have an oracy leader and an oracy strategy. Don't know whether they're any good or not, but they're talking about oracy. They've raised the status of oracy, and I think that is all down to the work of Voice 21, which actually, other than getting it going, I have had very little to do with. It's an extraordinary charity that directly trains a couple of thousand schools a year. So if you've come across oracy in your school or your child's school, then it started in Stratford and it was Peter's idea. So now 10 minutes on the university. This is how we're educated, right? GCSEs, A-level, then undergraduate. And became very clear to me that even though we were doing these cool projects at School 21, this was the path our students were going to have to follow. And in fact, as well as that, they weren't going to get rewarded for their oracy because most of the universities weren't going to interview them, other than Oxford and Cambridge. So we were doing these interdisciplinary projects which combined subjects, and they were going to still have to just narrow down to a set of A levels, which were typically around a particular area. And then the undergraduate. And of course, we were opening the school around about the time of the English baccalaureate, where the arts were under pressure, not included in the English baccalaureate. So often these GCSE selections and A levels did not include music and drama and art, which we were really not pleased about. So this got me thinking, maybe this blue line is the problem. Maybe what's happening is it's all gearing towards this single blue line. The whole education system is trying to organize itself to get students ready to go to university where they do one subject. So what happens if we were to break that? So that was my starting point. Um, it seemed to me that if universities collectively got together, or let's say even the Russell Group got together and said, we need to see A levels, but we also need to be able to do a perfect pirouette, then it would seem uh, obvious to me that the entire school system overnight would start hiring ballet teachers, right? They would fire their arts teachers and maybe even their physics teachers, and they would hire ballet teachers because the parents would be saying, how good are you at getting children to do a pirouette? So universities are extraordinarily powerful. We're going to skip over that for now. So the next person that was another middle-aged white Tory who was useful to me on this journey was Joe Johnson, the brother of Boris. And he introduced a new policy in 2017, which meant that you could open a new university with your own degree awarding powers right from the start. Previously, for those of you that are interested in this kind of thing, if you wanted to open a university, if you've ever looked at it, if you've ever looked at opening a new university, you'd have realized historically that you had to be validated by another institution before. So, not since the 1960s has a university opened with its own degree awarding powers. And that was Warwick University and York and Sussex, that kind of plate glass wave. Since then, we have had some new universities, but they've been validated by other places. And that kills innovation. It means you can't do anything new. You have to um, do essentially literally map against other degrees. Joe Johnson said we want some competition in the university sector, and we're going to create this ability for new entrants to enter and award their degrees straight away. So I thought, now we can actually offer something a little bit different. So here's my list for starting a university. You need a building. Actually, the top bit was really money. I mean, building for this wasn't as tricky. My feeling was if we had money, we could find a building. We need to start with a professor. I'm not an academic. We need regulatory approval. That proved a lot harder this time. We need to raise funding. Nothing came from the government this time. We need to attract students and worry about their parents as well in some cases. We need to get a faculty full of academics and design a curriculum. So similar list, but not quite the same. We got a bit of coverage way too early, so this was sort of terrifying as well as being exciting. So in March 2019, we were on the front page of the Times. Um, and I put this in here partly to tell you that, but also partly because this explains what we wanted to do. So we wanted to have people that were interested in a bunch of different subjects. That's what we meant by polymaths. That was the Times' word actually rather than ours. But we wanted students, and there are many, many in this country who don't just want to study chemistry at university or don't just want to do chemistry, physics, and maths for A level, don't just want to do history, art, and drama for A level, right? They want to continue doing a range of different things. I was one of those students, but I didn't continue doing English, sadly. I went to do sciences and went to do engineering. And I think that was pretty sad that I didn't get to do that. So we wanted to attract those students that had a breadth of interests. We had to write 1 million words for our regulatory approval. Little factoid. Anyone got any specific questions about that? I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. It took us about 5 to 6 months. I think we might do it in 3 days now with ChatGPT, so that's pretty galling. And our solution to this problem was, you go broad, narrow, narrower. What we actually need to solve the complex problems is an education that looks a bit more like this. Problems in the world, whether it's climate change, or pandemics, or threat of large-scale war, suppression of democratic rights, inequality. These are things which draw on the whole library, from books in corridors across the whole library. We need to understand that. It doesn't mean we need all our students to do an interdisciplinary education that looks a bit like this, but we need some. That's our thesis. So how do we design education that looks like that? Um, we, well, let me talk about that rather than talk about before I talk about the students. We organized the undergraduate and the masters around problems rather than around the discipline. So we don't start with physics and say, what are we going to teach to make them really good at physics? Each term, we start with a new problem. So whether that's climate or AI and ethics, let's say we start with AI in year two, term one. We do AI for that term, and they are learning machine learning, they're learning some data science, but they're also learning some law, they're learning some philosophy, and they are combining those subjects to try and uh, synthesize what they're learning from that to be able to think about this problem in a new way, this problem of AI and ethics. Similarly, with climate, they might be looking at material science, they might be looking at network science, et cetera, economics. And they're doing it at a university level. We have academics who've joined us from Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard and MIT and UCL, King's, LSE, where they were teaching specific subjects, and now they're collaborating, working together on this curriculum. Um, the students, I think the most important thing to say about the students is that they're brave because a lot of them have got straight A's. Most of them could have gone somewhere else to study at Russell Group. Many of them, not all of them. We interview every single person that applies. So we have people on our degree course that have 4 A stars at A level, and we have some people on our degree course, not as many, undergrad, who don't have any A levels at any level three qualification whatsoever. And typically in that situation, they had something happen to them in sixth form, or it didn't work out for them, or they fell out with the school, but they got decent GCSEs. We can see they're smart. We do an academic interview. What we're interested in is, can they be successful on the program? And the students that are coming are curious. That's the one thing we feel we can successfully assess for outside of academics. We tried assessing for resilience, we tried assessing for teamwork, we tried assessing even for self-reflection, and we found all those things quite hard to really assess for. But we can assess for curiosity. I'm happy to talk about that in the questions if you're interested, successfully. So we assess for curiosity, and then these students are interested in problems that are bigger than themselves. And as I said, they're willing to take a risk and come somewhere new. Um, The problems we look at have no right or wrong answer. There are many, many possible solutions, and they are impossibly interconnected. That is the currency of LIS and how we work. So each year, the students in their third term pick a problem that they're personally passionate about to go deep on. And they use all of the different methods and all of the different approaches that they've learned to LIS to tackle that individual problem. But that problem has to be what we call a wicked problem. So many possible solutions interconnected with other problems. And it's one of those problems where if you start to act on it in one way, the nature of the problem changes and shifts, and you might cause other problems elsewhere, second order consequences. There are no answers in the back of the book at LIS. No one knows what the answers are to the problems that our students are working on. We've just launched an MBA where that is as true as ever. The MBA, we've turned 180 degrees round from a normal MBA where you normally study finance and accounting and strategy. We don't think that's what is missing in the leaders of today. We think what's missing in the leaders of today is an understanding of the world outside the doors of their office. And by the way, you have to understand that world now because it's coming to you. You can't ignore it. And so what our MBA does is it helps sort our leaders understand the energy transition, the transition in intelligence which we're facing, the transition towards a much more complexity and interconnectedness, the shifting levels of trust in institutions, and a shift to longevity. So there's 6 shifts, which is what our MBA is built around, and that is what our MBA students who are with us today, this week, in an immersive week, that's what they're looking at. And we also work with professionals in just short courses. We do something called cross-functional leadership, which is about people trying to help managers understand how to manage people who are doing things that they don't fully understand, which is what obviously as you become more senior, it's more and more common for you to manage people where you're not expert. And that is kind of a lot of what we do. So, and I'll just finish with this idea of a fig leaf. And I put this in here, it's a slightly sort of, it's just a cautionary tale, or it's a reflection more on School 21 than on LIS, which is that we have to be reflective when we try to do something innovative about whether it's actually changing the system and whether it can endure. And I think there's bits of School 21 which have endured, and there's bits that haven't. And there's bits that worked and bits that didn't. And there's bits that only worked because there's a specific bunch of people trying very hard to do something different in Stratford and East London. It was never going to be scalable, no matter what we thought at the time. And in those circumstances, There's a sociologist called Hilary Cottam who talks about projects like School 21 can be a fig leaf for a system that doesn't work. Because everyone goes, oh, look, no, don't worry, the system must be great because schools like School 21 can exist. And there's several other examples in the country. We're all fine. But really, those projects are pushing very, very hard against gravitational forces that are pulling it back towards being just the same as everybody else. And those forces, 10 years on from School 21, have really dragged it back to being, a good school and doing some interesting things, but it's not the level of ambition of the projects that we were doing is no longer there. And I think that's interesting. However, to reflect on, as to why that was, I think probably in the current education system, with the current incentives of Ofsted and the exams system, GCSEs and A levels, trying to do projects at that level is just too darn hard. However, oracy seems to have been a bit of a breakout hit. So I think that's something that we can be pleased about. And I think why did that happen? That happened, I think, because there was energy. There was no political sort of. I think people on the right of politics or on the traditional side of education found projects a bit sort of tree huggy, whereas oracy, you can't really argue that speaking is important. Being able to speak powerfully in different settings is vital, whoever you are and wherever you're from. And there's also a feeling that public schools in the UK do that better, whether they do it better or those students just have more access to speaking and in other settings. I don't know. But and so what happened was every single party got behind oracy. The commission was successful. We were out training schools. We have a program which trains leaders, so you can become an oracy leader within a school with a qualification from Cambridge University. So we did a whole bunch of different things, which meant it broke out beyond the doors of School 21. Whereas project-based learning didn't. Neither really our idea, but we were an incubator for a while for those two things in a pretty serious way. One broke out and one didn't, and I think it's interesting to reflect on that. Okay, I'm going to stop there, Erica. Come back to you in case there's any questions.
That's amazing. And the first time that I've ever felt positive about Michael Gove.
Yeah, not saying anything.
I don't mean like just to enable that. That's all I mean. So
He said it's not the kind of school I would start, but I'm glad you're doing it. I think it's the nicest thing.
Yeah. So it's a really interesting. Has anybody got any questions? I've got loads of things that are kind of floating around in my mind, but we've got some great people like Laura on the call who runs Seven Arts, who's kind of sorry, Laura, I just kind of pinpointed you, but I'm sure there's some comments that you've got or questions.
Yeah, I mean, so many things. It's fascinating, and I think it's brilliant. I think always in the back of my mind, like you've said, Ed, is the things that actually we can see crossing over into formal education. So we run a music hub, and we have to produce statistics to the DFE of actually how many schools we work with, and that's pretty much it. So the impact and the sort of, we do a lot of statistics, we do a lot of reporting on what we do, but not how that actually changes things. So I think from what you were saying, how do it's all brilliant. And I think all of us on this call, and probably many, many more, and certainly all my team would say this is brilliant and this is what we want to see in our education system. But how do we make that embedded in a system that you've just said, isn't going to accept project-based learning? And the focus now is going to be on enrichment as well. And we've got this new enrichment framework, which we feel as kind of arts educators will actually then mean that we won't be focused on talent and learning and future leaders. And we will then be diminishing again arts and creative arts to a nice to have and an extra. And we've just finished a Paul Hamlin project on oracy, actually. So it's really, I'd be really interested in, mainly based around that strategy actually, and the commission and everything. So we've been working with an academy trust who have got an oracy leader and an oracy, so it's been brilliant. But the difficulty has been actually engaging the teachers and getting the confidence of that generation of teachers who haven't been used to that. So, I mean, it's just observation really. And how do we actually move from this focus on arts education as being an enrichment rather than a kind of necessity in order to sort of
Mm.
generate. And also, I mean, and that's just a comment really, but the other thing is around how did you get the students, originally, and the sort of parents and the to engage with this way of learning, because that's the other thing, when people are choosing their primary schools, and how do we encourage this kind of interdisciplinary um you know
You mean for School
students.
21? How do we
Well, yeah, not so much school 21, I guess it's for
LIS?
university. Yeah,
Yeah,
because it's like you get, I mean, I can see how how you would get a certain cohort, put it that way, who would be interested in this, and a certain set of parents who would be interested in
yeah,
this as
yeah.
well. So I'm interested in the sort of, how you get
Well,
a mix.
I mean, we're going, yeah, we were a bit concerned. We just get sort of students that could afford to take the risk, basically, and a kind of, your Guardian reading kind of well-to-do Hackney parents, and we do get a fair few of those. And actually, we actually get a lot of those parents coming to open days dragging a rather reluctant child who doesn't want to come, but they're desperate for their child to come to us. Um, that's not a good recipe, but we've had a schools program and we've had kind of intermittent success. In the first year, we had 30% of our intake we had some kind of widening participation flag, which was good. And this year, we had a really good intake. We've had a couple of years where particularly smaller cohorts, sometimes only 30 students, and quite a lot of them are people that you could feel like could afford to take the risk. But there was a growing number of students from disadvantaged backgrounds who are looking at Russell groups and saying, even if I get a 2-1 there, I'm still going to blend into the background. So this is the way to stand out. But you need to have quite something about you to be measured to do that. We found it harder to recruit to the undergrad than we have the masters and the MBA. The masters, people have got a degree, they kind of get into disciplinarity, they can take a bit of a risk on a brand and not necessarily having a brand name. It's a big decision when you're 17 to come somewhere. And we found it, so I'm just being honest, of the 50 students that joined us this September, only 7 came directly from school. So a lot were 19 and 20, but had a bit of time, often gone to another university, thought it was a bit crap, come to us. So yeah, we're still figuring out how to convince school leavers to join us, because you've got to convince you really have to convince the student and the parent, and you have to reassure them, despite the fact they've never heard of this, and it's a made up degree, that it's a good decision. That's not trivial.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I started an MBA, what, just before I got this job, actually, so 6.5 years ago. And I found it really not, I don't mean that irrelevant, but like it kind of didn't fit the kind of needs that we'd need for an organization. So it'd be interesting to kind of think about. My question is, yeah, how do you make that MBA relevant to what's happening now?
Yeah.
Because yeah, I definitely found that. I just went, oh, I know this stuff. Like I've watched Ken Robinson.
Mm.
I've read Dan Pink. I've done a lot of leadership stuff. I've done a lot of finance stuff. I've ran an organization, so I know what it's like in terms of those things. So I'd be really
Yeah.
interested in terms of, the people on the call is like, what does that mean for culture, and you know what I mean? I know it's interdisciplinary, but how does that
Well,
impact?
I mean, so first of all, we had big debates about whether to call it an MBA because it's so different to a normal MBA. But and even our program director for it still partly wishes it wasn't called an MBA. But my point is, we should be confident that this is what we think leaders should be learning, and we think
Yeah,
that currently business schools have got it wrong. The other sort of exam question for us was, what can only a university teach leaders in organizations? And I don't think it's marketing, because I think that chief marketing officers in organizations are probably better at marketing than academics in marketing in business schools. And that kind of goes for almost every function. And the thing that very few people in organizations know about is a sort of pretty deep understanding about what the underlying shifts are in how human and machine intelligence are interacting and likely to interact over time, and also understand those other things I talked about, right? Shifts in energy, shifts in the shift towards kind of man-made ecosystems as we sort of slowly destroy the natural ones. These are things which are going to be, which businesses and organizations need to engage with, and that businesses don't have that, just like 100 years ago, they probably didn't have the functional expertise either. Now they don't have that expertise. And so the reason we call it the MBA is to say, look, this is actually, if you're 30, 40, 50, and you want to go to the next stage as a leader, this is the stuff you need to know. And that you have to go to a university to learn. You can't just learn it on the job. And I don't think traditional MBAs pass that test.
I'd agree.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else got any questions?
I've got a
Laura,
few
you jump
few
in.
other observations. So I was quite, obviously, so I'm coming to the end of my career. But for people going into their careers and thinking about innovation and ambition, I mean, what you said was kind of like a little bit depressing for me in the sense that it's very difficult to do innovation and ambition with project-based learning. So it's kind of like how do you see what are the ambitions next? I mean, what's your kind of like thinking around how do you get I mean, I presume you get government platforms and you get people that are really keen to support you, a bit like us in the arts. They all go, it's lovely, but yeah, we've got other things to pay out here, and we're not really, we know it's great, but when we all did
You mean,
our,
how do you get schools? How do you get schools engaging with?
yeah, how do you get the schools to engage with that when they've got so many other things to sort of
Yeah,
tick
I think.
boxes on?
Well, I think the so it happened with oracy. I'm not sure. I'm not sure we knew it was going to happen with oracy. And so, what do I mean by that? I mean, so I thought that it was going to be crucial to have some kind of assessment, and that became a formal assessment, which Ofsted needed to see, and that became kind of almost like a GCSE in oracy or something like this, right? Or oracy became 25% of multiple different GCSEs for it to be taken seriously by thousands of schools. And so we worked with Cambridge University to devise an assessment. It turns out it's very, very hard to devise. You can't assess oracy at scale at the minute. Maybe with technology in the future we'll be able to do it, but you can't have 30 students in an exam hall speaking at the same time, getting judged. It just doesn't work. So it's hard to do. So that didn't really fly. And also it takes ages to test all the different forms. And so I was a bit downbeat when it looked like that was going to be a hard thing to do. And yet still it took off. And there was just this latent enthusiasm. And I think partly it was this political kind of crossover. Partly it was because we were able to demonstrate to schools that all teachers could use it in their practice, and therefore it could engage students in maths, in art, in all these different things. So genuinely, our maths teacher used oracy approaches in her maths classes at school, getting the students to stand opposite each other and discuss equations with each other, using oracy, sort of this very simple oracy frameworks. And that enables them to think afresh about a mathematical equation, right? And so same with the art. So the art teacher created a space on the floor. The students would put their work on the floor. Students would stand around this kind of tape and give each other feedback in a structured way. And so again, they're using oracy there. And we were doing formal training for the staff. We built it into our assemblies. We built it into our parents' evenings, and then we just sort of peppered it everywhere and saw what worked. But I think it was because it wasn't another block to fit in. It was like a die that you send into the entire school. And I think as well, I think the head teachers thought we've been good banging on the door of outstanding for multiple years now. Maybe this is the thing that gets us through, just in a very pragmatic sense. Maybe this is the thing that gets us to the next level and I can sort of, galvanize my team around because I'm out of stories or I'm out of energy. But okay, oracy, maybe we become an oracy school, because it's so inclusive, it sort of worked. So I don't know, but other than that, I agree. It's freaking hard trying to. Schools are busy, teachers are busy. We all know that. So it is difficult, and if it's not assessed, typically it doesn't get looked at. But oracy was different, and it's probably worth exploring why. And maybe there's something in the arts that can reflect something similar. Don't know.
Thank you. Can I just ask one final question? I'm sure everybody else has got questions. Um, can I? No, what was I going to ask? Oh, I've lost it now. Um, we talked about the oracy thing. No, I've forgotten. I'll come back to you if I can think of it. But yeah, I mean, brilliant what you're doing, and really interesting and really. Oh, that was it. Can you talk about the curiosity
Oh
assessment?
yeah, I thought someone. So yeah, so that's. I mean, it's pretty simple in a way. It's that we found that if we ask students to say what they're interested in, um, that you can then have a set of structured questions after that to figure out whether they really are interested in those things, whether those things are the things they're studying at A level or whether they're going beyond that. And you ask them for recommendations. Who should I be listening to? What books should I read? What Twitter feed should I be following or Substacks? If I was to learn more about this subject which you're interested in. And it's quite hard to fake it. Whereas when you're talking about resilience, we were interviewing one student who did join us, and she'd had some years homeless, as sort of kicked out of home when she was in the sixth form. And we were like, right, that presumably means she's extraordinarily resilient, but actually it doesn't. It just means she's had an awful experience, which would have required resilience. Um, but we weren't necessarily sure this was sort of valid for them to just tell us about something that experienced which required resilience, didn't tell us that they were very resilient, because we felt in these early years they were going to have to be resilient here because of the experience they were going to have. So we should have dropped that one. Teamwork, of course, people can describe an event that maybe happened, maybe didn't. Curiosity, it's quite hard to fake something that you're not interested in, but and pretend to be interested in it and know things about it and care. So that's why we do that. And there's a pretty good correlation between the people that scored highly on that and them doing well in the program.
Any other questions? So I saw Joe nodding. I've seen Paul nodding. Any questions that we've got? No, just interested to hear. I mean, what?
I mean, Laura fantastically asked pretty much all the questions I was going to ask, which is great. I guess the only thing I wondered if you could unpack a little bit more was about why project-based learning didn't take off in the way
Yeah,
that you anticipated it might
yeah.
have. Because I think for me, like I'm an independent organisation, and I'm not going to have a school, and I'm not going to have myself as somebody that can enthuse upon the school that I kind of own. That and
Mm.
so it kind of connects to one of the questions Laura has about getting stakeholders involved,
Yeah.
particularly teachers or head teachers when they're up against such a busy time. I wondered whether looking at it from why it didn't work.
So I think you need the head teacher. I mean, look, my belief is you need the head teacher to be behind it, and because it takes a lot of energy and organization around it, it needs curriculum, space, and time. You need to be able to accept that you will cover less curriculum whilst you're doing a project, because you're going deeper in a narrow area of the curriculum. So the learning will probably be deeper, but you're going to cover less, which subjects like science start getting very nervous about when students get into 13 and 14, because there's so much stuff to cover. Doesn't mean they're learning it, by the way, but they're covering the curriculum. So you have to be clear about that. And then designing projects is really hard. So I used that example about the sort of science experiment. You often have to run the project a couple of times to understand where the wrinkles are in the project, because there are not a bank of thousands of projects that have been done loads of times in the UK, particularly because it's just such a rare thing for people to do this properly. So it is very easy to do a bad project. And it's very easy to do a project where students honestly get bored, which people think, well, project-based learning sounds exciting. That must be great. It's actually, if badly designed project is really dull, because they're not learning anything. They're sort of fiddling about with papier-mâché in the sort of cliche of a badly designed one. And honestly, at School 21, we still saw this. It was very hard. Probably about half of our projects were really well designed and half not good enough. And that was with a lot of focus and energy from all of the leadership. And we had people from an American school called High Tech High in to consult us to try and make it good. Um, we put it right at the center of the school. It was still very hard to do really, really well. Um, but when it was done well, it was the most extraordinary learning you can imagine. I mean, the in the second year when we did our first big project, it was the students created an immersive, essentially like the Imperial War Museum. It was the anniversary of the start of the First World War, and the students created an immersive museum about the First World War, and a local community didn't really know much about the First World War because it wasn't part of their cultural history in Stratford. And they came and were kind of blown away. And the students were combining drama and art and physical making with a deep knowledge of the history. And yeah, Ofsted came whilst we were doing that project, and then they sent a film crew back the week later because they were like, "This is the most extraordinary project we've ever seen, so we want to kind of capture it." And those students, a year later, we left a lot of the thing up, and a year later, the students could still tour people around it and still remembered all this stuff about the First World War. And I still remember stuff about the First World War because of that project. So, the learning is deeper, it's narrower. When it's done well, it's brilliant, but it's spiky. It's very easy to do it badly, basically. And then it gets a bad reputation. And the people that don't want it to work for whatever reasons will use those examples.
I absolutely agree with you on the challenge of things being scalable. I've delivered a great number of kind of what you're describing as project work within schools, and one of the things we used to work when I was down in the southeast. In depth with the school for a year as an arts organisation, and the first thing we always asked was, "What's the problem you have that we can help you solve, that you haven't got time to think about?" And that always had fantastic results from schools going, "We've got all this outdoor space and we don't know what to do with it," to we did a project one year, which was a year of reading for a Catholic primary school, and did an immersive piece where story character woke up in their school and they had to write a story for her to go into. And then we had the book made and put into their local libraries so they could take it out and all that sort of stuff. But it takes real in-depth, considered and consistent work. And that's, as you say, completely dependent on head teachers and being connected to the right person within the school. Just anecdotally, similarly, we ran a young producers project for 7 years, and all of those young people who came to us as young producers are amazing in their fields, ranging from medical design equipment to Casey J. Andrews, who actually designs for Punch Drunk now, funnily enough. So you can see the roots, the breadth of engagement where you go. Not only are you making art, you're marketing, you're thinking about your audiences, you're thinking about the finances and the health and safety and the can we put people on a boat without doing a massive risk assessment, all of that sort of stuff that the young people had to do. Has made them into incredibly well-rounded adults. But it is how you scale that efficiently, but I think as arts organisations, asking that, what can't you solve without us, is a really great place to start.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think, sometimes it's unexpected what can scale and what can't. And I think, as I said, we didn't expect oracy to scale in quite the same way. And you could do, with School 21, I think my feeling is you'd need something around the system and the incentives to change before you could scale that. It just took too much energy and concentration of brilliant people that we'd handpicked to come and build this new school who desperately wanted this vision. If you're going to do that across schools that exist and have been ticking along for many, many years with teachers that would need to have a complete mindset shift, I think my fear would be quite a lot of it would be very low fidelity, not very good quality, So scaling for some of these things does require some pretty big system adjustment, like from the government, basically.
One of the most interesting things that we saw actually was we asked in every school whether teachers considered themselves to be artists at the beginning of the projects, and almost on a kind of stand along this line scale, so we could photograph where they began and where they finished, and almost to a man in the beginning they would be from absolutely not to maybe, with the possible exception of the arts lead within the school. And as we progressed through creative projects, we moved them as thinking about themselves creatively, but we're dealing with a system that has had an EBAC mindset towards the arts for 2 generations of teachers now as well. So that's a systemic problem that we have, of kind of the confidence for teaching staff to think of themselves as artists and creatives outside of an art lesson, a music lesson.
Indeed.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Sorry, I'm listening to this kind of having just flashbacks to my 20 years of kind of starting my career in creative partnerships, which was exactly kind of that approach to curriculum design, wasn't it? Around, developing creative skills, and now running an organization that, not running, chairing an organization that specifically kind of focuses on creative education and creative learning, but the kind of the flip of like, that interdisciplinary stuff, which is really interesting. That hence, like me being grumpy with Michael Gove, because he totally called that program,
Of course,
really exciting program, and did really brilliant things. But then also going back now and going, actually, it is about we're doing a program with Paul Hamlin around narrative immersion, and how culture and arts and creating scenarios and situations for those young people really supports their oracy and their development. It's and that's just school based, never mind going into kind of like future education. Lisa, I can see you've come on camera, so I feel like you've got a question.
Oh, I don't know, Erica. I've got lots of musings. And I guess I'm in a position of feeling a little bit fed up, if I'm completely honest. I think there was a lot of hope from the curriculum review, and initially we read it and went, oh yeah, they only mentioned arts, that's nice, isn't it? And then you kind of reread it and you realise that actually it's lip service is what the curriculum review is to arts. It pushes drama back to English more than perhaps ever before when you really read under it. And now we're Ofsted saying we're going to mark schools on a new framework that's 2 months away from being marked, and no one knows what that framework is, and we're all kind of like hoping on that in the way we were kind of hoping on the curriculum review. So we don't know. I would like to feel really positive, and like you, Erica, my career started at that creative partnerships time, and you just think, oh my goodness, and all the cycles of creative learning we've been through since then, from creative partnerships and then through, back to EBAC, and then oh, SEPs are the thing, oh no, we're not interested in them anymore, and I'm like, I'm wondering how we now reinvent ourselves to fit into this new thing. For us at the moment, with Solihull SEP, it's through Gatsby benchmarks. We really want to get into schools, and we find careers leads are the most susceptible to talking about arts. Other than the arts lead, they're the other person. So yeah, so I don't know what I'm saying. I don't really have a question. I just have like a feeling of I don't know where we go now. Schools are so stressed and busy and lack of funding. So yes, I'm hoping someone's going to say on this call, Lisa, don't worry, it's all okay because I've got this magic wand. So if someone has one of those, I'll give you my address.
I've got one.
Have you, Paul? Go on then.
Go on, you were going to say something.
It'd be interesting to see. Look, there's going to be a lot of change in the university sector in the next 5-10 years, with some going out of business, AI really transforming what people feel is the point of a university degree. And it'd be interesting to see what comes out the other side, because if suddenly people are going to further study or higher education to study the arts because that's the thing they actually feel they need, or that's the thing that's distinctive, then schools will have to respond to that. But I actually think, but I'm not saying that will happen, but that's a possibility. But until you separate out how schools are judged with what universities want, and then the minute they're completely enmeshed, you're sort of beholden to what universities are asking for.
But whilst the government continues to squash arts in universities,
yeah, no,
that's the other thing, isn't it?
I mean, I don't need to tell you, it's completely bonkers that it doesn't recognize that it's, it doesn't it sort of sees it as this fanciful idea rather than a really big sector and huge potential for the country. We as a sort of final thing on it though, we when we started with just 6 teachers in a secondary school in 2012, because we had 75 students in that year, 6 teachers, we had to pick which subjects. And we chose a maths teacher because we had to, an English teacher because we had to, and a science teacher because we had to. And the other 3 were a dance teacher who also did PE, an art teacher, and a drama teacher. So half of the teaching body was very, very arts. And that was such an important decision for us. And it really brought the school to life. It was amazing. But that's if you're starting a school. It's hard to rewire schools that way.
Yeah, and I'm sorry for feeling like a grump. Generally, I'm not. I very passionately believe in this, and we'll keep fighting that good fight, as we all will. But sometimes you just think, oh, come on, throw us a bone. And I think I'd thought that might come from the curriculum review, and then I thought that might come from the new framework. So let's hope the framework still does some of that work for us. It would be good, because when you're talking to schools, having some policy to lean on that gets those head teachers on board, those SLTs on board that aren't necessarily, generally arts focused, is really helpful. Sorry, I feel like I've depressed everybody now.
I did, Lisa. Do you know what? I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of the challenges that we're all facing. But as Ed has definitely demonstrated, just have to crack on and do it sometimes.
You do, and that's what we're all doing, isn't it?
Exactly. And we just have to do what we believe in and kind of take that fight forwards one way or another and do it. And people will be. I'm gonna just, like, Anthony is on the call. Anthony, obviously, as our Chief Strategy Officer at Culture Central, is also a bit of an expert in cultural and creative education. So I'm just going to give, if you've got any comment there, Anthony, before we finish the meeting in 1 minute.
Brought me in 1 minute before the end of the call, and I think actually the
Sorry.
question that I was thinking of all the way through was with that stuff around, there's going to be huge changes in higher education policy. We're seeing all of that at the moment with universities. In fact, there was a report out yesterday, I think from King's as well, about the future of European universities. That's really interesting for people to have a look at. It's so much of the same stuff. But I sort of wanted to, and this is like Lisa's question actually, I wanted to turn or get your thoughts, Ed, on turning the lens on the sector itself, so on the arts sector, and how good people feel that is in terms of working in interdisciplinary ways. Actually, like, do we as a sector feel like we've got we're ready to kind of go into this new world as well when we're quite structured in quite disciplinary ways?
I mean, well, so I don't know. I mean, I guess it's not something I've been looking at closely, but what we meant by interdisciplinary at school and what we would mean here is that for you to call yourselves interdisciplinary, you'd have to say we work with scientists and we work with mathematicians and we work with AI kind of practitioners or whatever. And that may or may not be right. And it may be that if I'm trying to think, if you say, look, you can generally use these different arts practices to improve or collaborate to bring science to life, and history would be the obvious one, to life, then that could engage schools. But I also resist that because arts has an inherent importance and inherent value, and shouldn't just be sort of to help something else get done. So we always had this discussion. Well, oracy was a big one, right? People are like, great, oracy can make you better at writing. It's like, well, oracy is also important in and of itself, but if you get too precious and you try and do something that's too pure, often you don't get very far. So you have to compromise.
On that note, Ed, thank you so much for your expert knowledge and time. And if anybody's got any questions or anything that are really interested in, we can connect you in with Ed. And I think I'm pretty sure the team and the board will be looking at the MBA and the various different
I do.
that you run. So thank you again. We're 1 minute over time, but thanks everyone for joining, and we'll look forward to you to joining you. I was thinking what's happening in June. We're in June. It's June. Where's that gone? And we're looking at